It says, about this time, for those of you who can follow with me, and I hope that you can with your Bibles, since this is Bible study, Genesis 38. And I'm reading, by the way, from the New Living Translation of the Bible, from the New Living Translation of the Bible, Genesis 38. Join me there if you can. It says, about this time, Judah left home and moved to Adullam. Now, Jacob and his entourage, his camp, his household, very wealthy household, they're situated around the region of Hebron. All of this is in Israel, ancient Canaan land, and they're to the north. Judah decides to strike out from his father's household and strike out on his own. And he leaves his father, his brothers, his kinspeople, and he goes south to an area called Adullam. And the scripture says, I'm in Genesis 38 and verse 1, where he stayed with a man named Hira. And there he saw a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and he married her. So already we have Judah striking out, not only locating himself in a different region than his father and his brothers and his kinsmen, but also he is doing something that many would consider to be forbidden for the Jews to do. And that is, he is marrying now a Canaanite woman. Of course, the Jews were directed to the land of Canaan, and in the land of Canaan there dwelt the Canaanites, among several other tribes, and Jebusites, et cetera, and et cetera. But the Canaanites were there. They were natives of the land. And the Jews were there, of course, trying to claim territory for themselves and establish themselves. Well, they were not allowed to intermix and intermarry with the women of Canaan, because it was felt that those women or those men of Canaan would lead the Jews into idol worship and would cause them to forsake Jehovah Yahweh, Elohim, the God of the Israelites, the ones whom they worshipped. And we read about that in let's see where the Jews are forbidden. Leviticus 18 and 15, and then Deuteronomy 21, 15 through 17. So again, this is Bible study. So follow along with me here, because I'm setting this up. I want to give you the background, because we're talking tonight about how God does indeed work all things together for our good, even the things that we think don't work, the things that are distasteful, the things that we consider to be damaging and negative. I'm talking about how God takes all of that into the mix and works it out for our good. So Judah, again, the fourth son born to Jacob and Leah, goes into this new territory, and he marries this Canaanite woman. And I was talking about the fact that that was not allowed according to what the Jews had been instructed to do. So in Deuteronomy, just go there, 21. Deuteronomy 21, 15 through 17. Deuteronomy 21, 15 through 17. Hope you can look at this with me. Here's what the text says concerning the intermarrying of Jews with the Canaanites. Deuteronomy 21, verse 15 says, if I can find it. Well, no, I don't want to go there. Deuteronomy 15:21. I want to go to Leviticus 18:15. That's where I want to go. This is live Bible study, as you can tell. So let's go to Leviticus 18:15. Leviticus 18:15 says this. And it says, Deuteronomy 18 and 15 says, Deuteronomy 18:15. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law, she with a wife, and that's not where I want to go either. Let me see. Maybe I do want to go to Deuteronomy 21. I'm trying to find the passage that forbids the intermarrying of Jews with the native Canaanites. And sometimes it's hard for me to read my own notes that I've written, but give me a minute and we'll all be there together. Deuteronomy 21:15. Let me see if that's where I want to go. Deuteronomy 15. I don't think that's where I want to go either. All right. Maybe I want to go to Numbers 27. Let me see if that's where I want to go. Numbers 27, Jews forbidden. No, I want to go to Deuteronomy 7:2-4. Forgive me for the mix-up. I'm finally able to decipher my own writing. I used to have good penmanship, but through the years it has deteriorated, so I have a hard time reading my own writing sometimes. But it's Deuteronomy 7:2-4 is where I want to go. Deuteronomy 7. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Deuteronomy 7:2-4. Deuteronomy 7:2-4. And this is where it is forbidden. When the Lord your God, this is Deuteronomy 7:2-4 is where I want to go. Deuteronomy 7:2, when the Lord your God hands these nations over to you and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them. And of course, this is God speaking to the Jews concerning how they are to handle the native people in the land that they believe God had given to them, had promised them, the promised land. And God says, when I hand these nations over to you and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them. That's what the text says. Make no treaties with them and show them no mercy. Verse 3, you must not intermarry with them. Do not let your daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods. That's Deuteronomy 7 and verse 3. Do not let your daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods. The anger of the Lord will burn against you, and he will quickly destroy you. This is what you must do. Now, I read that passage, Deuteronomy 7:2-4, to indicate that already Judah has struck out. And according to Genesis 38, let's go back there to follow the story. Genesis chapter 38. Judah leaves home. He goes down into the region of Adullam, stay with a man called Hira, and he saw a Canaanite woman, verse 2. This is Genesis 38:2. Saw a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and he married her, the Canaanite woman, in, by the way, disobedience of what was instructed in Deuteronomy 7:2-4. And let's see how God uses that. He slept with her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and he named the boy that's E-R. Then she became pregnant again and gave birth to another son, and she named him Onan. And when she gave birth to a third son, she named him Shelah. At the time of Shelah's birth, they were living at Kezib. In the course of time, according to the text, I'm in Genesis 38:6, in the course of time, Judah arranged for his firstborn son, to marry a young woman named Tamar. But was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Now, we can only speculate as to what did to cause the writer of Genesis to call him so wicked that God took his life. I mean, we can only speculate because the text does not tell us. It just says that was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Er's brother Onan, go and marry Tamar. Go and marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brother of a man who has died. You must produce an heir for your brother. So what is going on here? This is a practice of the Jews called levirate marriage. Levirate marriage. It's spelled Levirate, levirate marriage. And it is derived from the Latin word levir, Levir. Levir means brother-in-law. And levirate marriage was a custom which obliged a man to impregnate his dead brother's widow. Levirate marriage. It was a custom which obliged a man to impregnate his dead brother's widow if the brother had died without a male heir. So keep in mind that this is a very paternalistic society, and property rights, head of the household rights, are transferred through sons. Sorry, ladies, not through daughters, because this is a paternalistic society. And paternalism, by the way, is a form of sexism, which means that men are dominant over women. And men control households, family, property, et cetera, to the extent that women are only significant in regard to their relationship with men. So a woman goes from her father's custody into the custody of her husband. If her husband dies and she is a widow, if she does not have a son to provide for her, to take care of business for her, to protect her, she can very well end up a poor widow and die penniless or be homeless. So it's very, very important that women maintain these connections with men. Now, I'm not talking about the morality of it. I'm talking just about the practice of it in ancient Israel. So according to the levirate custom, if a man and woman did not have a male heir, and then the man died, the brother of the deceased man was then obliged to have sex with his dead brother's widow in order to produce a male heir. So that's what's happening here in Genesis 38. After the death of that was Jacob and his wife's firstborn son, after his death due to some kind of wickedness that we don't know, Jacob goes to his second son, Onan, and says, Onan, you have to now go and have intercourse with Tamar, your dead brother's wife, a widow now. Go have sex with her because thereby you can produce an heir, and therefore I can transfer the head of the household to the son of my firstborn through you. So technically, even though you would sire the child would be known as the son of and therefore receive the inheritance from me. And so you would just sire the child, but really the child would be the heir of the household property and power and leadership. And that's what Onan was instructed to do by Judah. So, reading again, Genesis 8:38. Then Judah said to Er's brother, Onan, go and marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brother of a man who has died. You must produce an heir, get this, for your brother, not for yourself. you must produce an heir for your brother. So says Genesis 38 and verse 8. Verse 9, but Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. Because keep in mind, with the death of firstborn son to Judah, all of the inheritance, the leadership of the household, the leadership of the clan would go to the next born son. That would be Onan. So Onan now stands to inherit his father's inheritance because his older brother, has died. But if Onan produces a child with his dead brother's widow, the inheritance no longer goes to Onan, it goes to the child, because that's what the custom required. It's what the custom required. But Onan is like, well, I don't know if I want to give up my rights to the inheritance, because once I produce a child, all of that will go to him. And not only that, I would never be recognized as his true father. As a matter of fact, I would be his servant, because he would be Er's son by right of inheritance, not mine, even though I sired the child with Tamar, my dead brother's widow. So Onan has issues with it. And so verse 9 says, Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground. Now, many people think that Onan's, or at least I will say in some traditional religious circles, persons have been taught that the sin of Onan was masturbation. And so we have all kinds of myths and fallacies surrounding what would happen to persons who masturbated, particularly boys, men. Some of us were told that you will go blind. Some of us were told that the devil would take over your mind if you masturbated. I mean, there are all kind of folklore and fallacies and myths concerning masturbation. And some think that Onan was cursed because he masturbated. But Onan did not masturbate. Onan had intercourse, and Onan pulled out of Tamar and spilled his seed on the ground. Probably because he knew that by having the child, he would basically be doing himself out of his father's inheritance, that the child would receive what Onan believes rightfully belongs to him. Now, of course, this whole system of patriarchy sets up this competition between boys and men, because it's all about the firstborn rights. It's all about the firstborn inheritance. It's all about the firstborn male child. And women are mainly considered as incubators for a man's seed. Women are basically considered as incubators for a man's seed. Now, I talked about what Onan stood to lose if he had been successful in impregnating Tamar. He would have, in essence, been giving away his inheritance. And that's probably not something that Onan wanted to do. So he had sex with her, but he did not ejaculate in her. And so you got this system set up of competition. Now, in terms of Tamar, let's read a little bit further in the story. Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground. This prevented her from having a child who would belong to his brother, not to him. But the Lord considered it evil for Onan to deny a child to his dead brother. So the Lord took Onan's life too. Now, that is, of course, how the writer interpreted the events. Some kind of way, after refusing to impregnate Tamar, even though Onan did have sex with her, but refusing to impregnate her by planting the seed in her, Onan died also. Now, we don't know why died, and the writer is convinced that even though the writer doesn't tell us why the older brother died, the writer seems convinced that the reason why Onan died is because Onan did not do what Father Judah instructed him to do, and that was to impregnate Tamar. So now Onan, according to the text, at least pays the price for not providing an heir through his dead brother's widow. And he too dies. So now we have two sons of Judah's three sons. Two of them are now gone. Heir, we don't know why. Onan, because as it is said, he refused to impregnate Tamar. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Go back to your parents' home and remain a widow until my son Shelah is old enough to marry you." Now, this is the third son. Has died, Onan has died, and now Shelah is the one who, according to the Levirate code, according to the Levirate custom, it's called Levirate marriage, it's a custom, the next to kin male then can impregnate the widow of the firstborn son, and now it is said that Shelah will do. Shelah, the youngest son, will do what Onan, the second son, refused to do. And so until that happens, until Shelah is old enough, assumed here that Shelah, the younger son, the youngest son, and the last son, is too young to marry. But Judah says to Tamar, just go back to your parents' home, remain a widow, and when Shelah is old enough, I will send him to you, and then he will have a child that will be the heir of my household through you. By the way, that will also secure a place for you in the household of Judah. Because keep in mind, Judah is a wealthy man, and the household of Judah is a sprawling, wealthy, well-funded, productive household. I mean, it's a clan. He is building his own tribe. He is building his own component to the nation, and he has wealth. He has servants. He has resources at his disposal, and whoever inherits that will inherit great wealth, power, and of course the right to lead the clan, to lead the tribe. To be in control of the vast resources that Judah had accumulated. And so Shelah now is the designated one to do what and Onan did not do, and that is impregnate Tamar so that an heir could be produced. Now, of course, without an heir, everything falls to Shelah, but again, according to this Levirate custom, they want it to come through the firstborn son. They want it to come through the firstborn son. So Tamar has an interest because without producing a son, her place in the household of Judah is jeopardized. Because keep in mind, women are not valued for who they are. Women are valued for their ability to produce sons. Women are not valued for who they are. Women are valued for their ability to produce sons. And so, by the way, if people talk about, I want to be married the way, the way it was in the Bible, no, you don't. Because all of this would have gone on if we were still practicing the way marriage was done in the Bible. And particularly this levirate thing would mean that brother-in-laws would have responsibility to impregnate their sister-in-laws of their oldest brothers if their oldest brothers did not produce a male heir. So there are all kind of intricacies and all kind of slights and all kind of dehumanization regarding women in these ancient practices of how inheritance is passed on. But Tamar's interest is in securing her place in the house of Judah, because without producing a male heir, she has no place. Bottom line, she has no place. That's why Judah instructs her in Genesis 38 and verse 11 to go back to her parents' home. And of course, she was a Canaanite, so she's sent out of the house of Judah. And Judah says to her, when Shelah is old enough, I'll send for you again. You can come back, have intercourse with Shelah, have a son, but then that son will guarantee your place in the house of Judah. Aside from that, you have no place in the house of Judah because, again, women were only considered to be the incubators of a man's seed. That's all. That was their value. That was their worth as incubators. Sexist, patriarchal, dehumanizing, of course. But that's what happens when we get more caught up in customs and principles than people. Because I want to tell you that there are a whole lot of principles that destroy people that people follow anyway because they are more interested in the principle than they are in the person. There are all kinds of principles. There are all kinds of principles that deny people, that deny people's value. There are all kinds of principles that overlook a person's humanity in order to make a person useful in a system that ensures the supremacy of a certain class or a certain sect or a certain gender or even a certain race. I mean, you talk about principles. I mean, let's, talk about the fact that, Harriet Tubman, who many of us are still fighting for her face, her image to be placed on our currency, or at least one of our bills. I think it's the $20 bill, if I'm not mistaken. Harriet Tubman, a great hero, a great leader, a great moral figure in the eyes of many people, regardless of race, by the way, a great leader, but technically, legally, she was an outlaw. According to the principles, according to the codes of enslavement, black enslavement in America, Harriet Tubman was an outlaw. She was a criminal. And there are many people who, believe it or not, would place the principle or the law above the person and would refuse to honor Harriet Tubman because technically she was a criminal because she was in violation of the law concerning the enslavement of black people. And not only did she run away, but she went back and led others to freedom. And there were all kinds of fugitive slave laws out to convict her and condemn her. I'm talking about principles that destroy people and people who are more concerned with principles than they are people. I mean, look at the whole border issue that's going on in America today. I'm making the application here so we can see how God works all things together for good. But I'm making the point here about how so many people are so fixated on principles that they deny people. So the border laws, well, okay, you're supposed to come to America a certain way. If you want to be a citizen, you get in line, you follow the laws. Technically, the people who are at the border trying to get into the country are breaking the law, technically. Unless, of course, they are doing it for asylum, in which case we are supposed to, by law, provide asylum for persons, or a safe place, a safe shelter, if you will, for persons who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing terror in their native countries. And so, unless you meet those qualifications and, et cetera, people say, well, technically you're breaking the law. And, people who are here illegally, sometimes we call them lawbreakers, illegal immigrants, those titles, those terms that speak to the fact that technically, and there are people who are more interested in the law than they are in meeting the needs of people. And that's really the clash about the border right now. Our president and his supporters are interested in enforcing the law. These people are breaking the law. They have not gotten in line. They have not done. They have not taken the necessary steps to become citizens. So we owe them nothing, and we feel justified in however we treat them, because after all, they are criminals and lawbreakers. Even if that means separating parents from children, and putting persons in cages and not allowing them to wash, eat, be treated with decency and fairness. And there are many people who have no problem with that. No problem whatsoever. Many people in high places have no problem with that. Because after all, technically, they have violated the principle of the law. And there are others of us who say that may be the principle. That may be the law. That may be what's on the books. But we have a higher responsibility to treat people humanely and decently, even if technically they are lawbreakers. And so what's going on here in the text is that you have this principle of levirate marriage, and women are not even considered. As a matter of fact, Onan wasn't even considered. And he was a man, but he knew that the principle would have worked against him. By impregnating Tamar, he would have basically been giving away his right of inheritance, or his right to the inheritance from his father Judah. But they're not concerned about any of that. They're concerned about the principle being followed. And that's why Judah is so insistent that one of his sons, Onan or Shelah, impregnate Tamar, so that they can fulfill the principle of levirate marriage that I just explained. Levirate, Levirate, levirate marriage. And what happens when we put principles over people? We have all kind of crazy things that go on, all kind of inhumane, negative, nasty, dehumanizing things that go on as people try to promote principles over people. And by the way, religious people are good for that, because religious people will beat you over the head with all kind of principles and completely forget about people. I mean, look at the fight that we've had about gay marriage. And people are like, well, it's the principle of the thing. The church has taught this principle. But the principle has damaged people, because to disallow by principle and by law and by church mandate, to disallow a person to marry the person that he or she truly loves is to set that person up to live a life of deception, dishonesty, and hypocrisy. When people are not free to marry who they love, then they marry who the principle or who the church doctrine or who the law says they must marry. And that causes all kinds of deception, all kinds of deceit, all kinds of dysfunction, mentally, morally, spiritually, psychologically. And we end up with a whole lot of mess, all because we elevate principles over people. That's a problem. And that's what's going on here in the text. By the way, by one of the founders of the Israelite nation, Judah, as he had been taught the principle, but could not put the principle in check in order to value people. Now, it's interesting that when it came to his own marriage, he disobeyed the principle because, as we said earlier in this, and I got the right text now, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 2 through 4, strictly forbids the intermarrying of Jews with the Canaanites for fear that the Canaanites would lead the Jews whom they married into idolatry. But when it came to his own likes, his own interest, Judah married a Canaanite woman that we just read in Genesis 38. So it's interesting how we can bend the rules when it comes to us. Very interesting how we can bend the rules when it comes to what we want to do. And yet we want to be strict taskmasters. We want to be defenders of the code. We want to uphold the standard, as people say. Well, there's got to be a standard. Except when you want to bend it to meet your needs. But everybody else got to live up to the standard. And even though Judah married a Canaanite in direct contradiction of Deuteronomy 7, 2 through 4, he is insistent that his inheritance be given according to principle, not according to how he values people. If he had talked to his own son, Onan would have told him, I don't want to do that. Obviously, he didn't want to do it and didn't. But the text says that it displeased the Lord. I wonder, did it displease the Lord or did it just displease Judah? Because, we do bring our own interest to how we read the text. And I'm sure the writers of the text also brought their own interest to it. But let's follow the story. So you got these people caught up in this cycle of principle that is damaging and that is irrespective of a person's value, but is only designed to put the inheritance in the hands of the firstborn's son. So Tamar is looking out for her own interest too. She's caught up in it. And she says to herself, probably, listen, if this is the only way I can secure my place in the household of Judah, a place of honor, a place of respect, a place of privilege, if this is the only way I can secure that place in the household of Judah, then, I'll take the brothers because all they really want to do is produce a son anyway, so let's just get it done. And at least my place will be secured. So she's caught up in this system of patriarchy, this system of male domination. So she's sent back to live with her father in a Canaanite village until Shelah is old enough to do the business and impregnate her. Verse 12, Genesis 38. Some years later, Judah's wife died, and after the time of mourning was over, Judah and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went up to Timnah to supervise the shearing of his sheep. Someone told Tamar, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So Judah, a wealthy sheik, a wealthy Jewish sheik, has sheep and all kinds of cattle. So many that he's going up now to shear the sheep, and that was always a major event because the shearing of the sheep brought many people together, and many people were just in the same vicinity. And so you had food, you had dancing, you had music, and you also had women available. prostitutes, if you will, to entertain the men, as the custom was. And Tamar gets word that her father-in-law, Judah, is going to the sheep shearing convention. And verse 14 of Genesis 38 says that Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but no arrangements had been made for her to come and marry him. So she is aware that Shelah is now of age to have a child, to have sex, but Judah has reneged on his promise to send Shelah to Tamar. And Tamar is upset about that because, again, her place in the household of Judah, her place of privilege, status, respectability in the house of Judah is in jeopardy, is in question. Will it ever happen? If she's already not been impregnated by she's already not been impregnated by Onan, if Shelah does not impregnate her, she's out. And she stands to lose all of her place in the household of Judah, a very wealthy household. And so, aware that Shelah had grown up, but no arrangements had been made for her to come and marry him, she changed out of her widow's clothing because, of course, she was forbidden to have sex with anyone else because, after all, she is a widow, but she is now promised to the brother of her deceased husband. But she changed from her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road at the entrance to the village of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. Judah noticed her and thought she was a prostitute, since she had covered her face. So he stopped and propositioned her. "Let me have sex with you," he says, not realizing that she was his own daughter-in-law. "How much will you pay to have sex with me?" Tamar asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," Judah promised. And people exchanged goats and cattle like currency because they were valuable. I mean, they were of value. So Judah says, "I'm going to send you a goat. But what will you give me to guarantee that you will send me the goat?" she asked. "What kind of guarantee do you want?" Judah replied. She answered, "Leave me your identification seal and its cord and the walking stick you are carrying." So you're a wealthy person, a wealthy man, had a seal, which was his signature, if you will. It's like maybe a credit card, that authorized stuff to be done at his bequest. And so his seal and its cord that he wore around his neck and his walking stick, all very valuable. He leaves that, according to the text. It says Judah gave them to her, his seal and his walking stick, his identity. And then he had intercourse with her, and she became pregnant. So she's holding the seal and the walking stick as a down payment on the goat that he has promised her. And afterwards, she went back home and took off her veil and put on her widow's clothing as usual. Of course, Judah does not know that he has just had sex with his daughter-in-law. Later, Judah asked his friend Hirah, the Adullamite, to take the young goat to the woman and pick up the things he had given her as his guarantee. But Hirah couldn't find her, so he goes back. Judah sends one of his assistants back to the gate with the goat, and they can't find Tamar. So he asked the men who lived there, "Where can I find the shrine prostitute who was sitting beside the road at the entrance to Enam?" Now, they say that she was a shrine prostitute or a temple prostitute because the Canaanites believed that the temple prostitutes provided an opportunity for persons to worship the god of fertility by having sex with the temple prostitutes. So the temple prostitutes were there to provide opportunity for men to have sex with them and thereby worship the god of fertility. And so They asked for Tamar. She's not to be found. They said, we don't have any shrine prostitutes here, they replied. So Hira replied to Judah and told him, I couldn't find her anywhere, and the men of the village claimed they've never had a shrine prostitute there. Then let her keep the things I gave her, Judah said. I sent the young goat as we agreed, but couldn't find her. We'd be the laughingstock of the village if we went back again to look for her. So again, Judah wants to keep all of this, on the down low, of course. So he says, don't go back looking for her. Don't ask any more questions. Let's just leave it alone. I did what I told her I would do. She wasn't there to get it. So let her keep, the seal and the walking stick. I'm wealthy. I can get all those things again. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted like a prostitute, and now, because of this, she's pregnant. So, of course, Tamar wasn't supposed to get pregnant unless she got pregnant through Shelah. So the fact that she is pregnant means that she has been having sex outside of the covenant, and therefore she is labeled a prostitute, when really, of course, we know that she has just had sex with her father-in-law. Bring her out and let her be burned, because that was the principle. All right, a woman who betrayed her intended, in this case Shelah is her intended, and by betraying him by having sex with somebody else, the penalty, according to the principle, is that she should be burned to death. Bring her out and let her be burned, Judah demanded. Again, he's going to follow the principle, even though he himself didn't follow it, but he's going to follow it now. But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law. The man who owns these things made me pregnant. Look closely, whose seal and cord and walking stick are these? Judah recognized them immediately and said, she is more righteous than I, because I didn't arrange for her to marry my son Shelah. And Judah never slept with Tamar again. When the time had come for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered that she was carrying twins. While she was in labor, one of the babies reached out his hand. The midwife grabbed it and tied a scarlet string around the child's wrist, announcing this one came out first. But then he pulled back his hand and came his brother. What? The midwife exclaimed, how did you break out first? So he was named Perez. Then the baby with the scarlet string on his wrist was born, and he was named Zerah. Now, I got to wrap this up. How time flies when you're talking about biblical truths and biblical insights and biblical folly, because a lot of this is folly, and a lot of this is, a lot of people are damaged by these unintended consequences of promoting principles over people. But I will say this, Tamar is viewed as a woman of courage because she used what was at her disposal to secure her a place in the house of Judah. Now, of course, she produces these sons. One of these sons becomes the progenitor or the ancestor of one King David. And King David is, of course, an ancestor of Jesus the Messiah. I say all of that to say that God uses folly, God uses our idiosyncrasies, God uses our prejudices, God uses bad traditions, and all of that to work things together for our good. Tamar, labeled by some a prostitute, which you can say, well, she acted like one, but she used what was at her disposal to secure her rightful place in the household of Judah, and thereby became an ancestor of Jesus Christ himself. Tamar and Judah, her father-in-law, ancestors of Jesus Christ himself through one of the sons born illicitly to Judah and Tamar. I just want you to think in these last few minutes about how God can use foolishness, folly, even wickedness and evil to still advance God's good aims. And in life, what we have to do is pay attention. And even if we, like Tamar, are the victims of discrimination, sexism, whatever kind of ism it is, we have to be mindful that it is God who is ultimately in control. And we do our best, and we trust God, And we believe that God has a purpose even in the pain, even in the calamity. God has a plan and God has a purpose. That's about all that I have time for in this Bible study. Maybe I'll pick this up next time and say more about how God used this calamity of events, how God used this tragedy of principle to produce the Messiah that we call Jesus, and Tamar's particular role in willing herself into God's plan. Stay tuned for ways that you can support this broadcast. May God bless you. May God be with you. May God take all of your confusion, work it out for your good, because you love the Lord and because you've been called according to God's purpose. It's my prayer. May God bless you.